want to hit record. We have about 50 folks in the room. I assume some more will be joining us over the course of the meeting. So Carmen, if you'd like to take it over, it's all you.
Okay, taking over now. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carmen Bendixson. I'm the president of the Seattle Public Library's Board of Trustees. I'm going to be starting our session here today by just a little bit of formal opening that as there is a quorum of the 5-member Library Board of Trustees attending the session, I'm now calling to order a special meeting of the Library Board of Trustees at 4:30 on Wednesday, February 9th, 2022. The format of this meeting is a public forum and no decisions will be made. So to get down to the matter at hand, last spring, the board formed a 9-member search advisory committee to develop a process and a timeline for candidate selection for the chief librarian, as well as recommendations for finalist candidates. I served on that committee along with 8 other individuals who were asked to participate because of their experience and expertise in the library field, and also for their commitment to the community the library serves. So then last summer, the committee selected and hired a national recruiting firm, Koya Partners, to help us in the work of attracting the strongest candidates to the position of executive director and chief librarian of the Seattle Public Library. Since then, we've had many discussions about the qualities of a successful candidate, and Koya Partners has connected with nearly 250 industry connectors and potential candidates. So then the committee identified 6 first-round interview candidates, and from there, 2 finalist candidates were recommended to the board. Tom Fay, the current interim chief librarian for the Seattle Public Library, and Chad Helton, most recently the library director of the Hennepin County Library, Minnesota. We'll introduce our first candidate in just a minute. But first I want to introduce my co-host for these public forums, Library Board Vice President, and formerly the board president, Jay Rich. Jay, thank you for joining me today to introduce these candidates to the community.
Thank you, Carmen, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. As the former board president, I had the pleasure of appointing members to the Search Advisory Committee and hearing their recommendations for how best to move through the selection process for a new chief librarian. I think we have 2 strong candidates for our consideration, and I'm looking forward to all of us getting to know them better this week. Let me share a bit about how these forums will go. First, we will introduce the candidate. The candidate will then deliver a 30-minute presentation to us covering their own work and library background, their interest in the chief librarian position, how they view the role of community in public libraries, and what their vision is for the future of the Seattle Public Library. The remainder of our time together will be reserved for your questions. You can start sending those in at any time via the chat function, and we will queue them up. Laura Gentry, the librarian's head of communications, will be monitoring the chat and let us know what questions you have. Apologies in advance if we don't get to your question. It is important that we cover a range of topics, and there may be more questions than we have time for. In the last 5 minutes or so, we will close out the meeting and share information on how to provide the library board with your feedback about these candidates. Carmen, I'll hand it back over to you to introduce our first candidate.
Thanks, Jay. The first candidate we're meeting this week is Tom Fay, the Seattle Public Library's current interim chief librarian. Since 2015, as the library's director of programs and services, Fay has overseen the library's public services and programs, collections, materials handling, and information technology departments at Seattle's Downtown Central Library and the 26 neighborhood branches. As a native of Southern Nevada, Fay's 38-year career in libraries began as a page for the Las Vegas Clark County Library District. Prior to joining Seattle Public as Director of Programs and Services in 2015, Fay held roles as the Executive Director of Henderson Libraries in Nevada and the Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer of Las Vegas Clark County Library District in Nevada. Fay graduated with a fine arts degree from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and a master's in library information science from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. He's been awarded the O'Callahan Public Sector Person of the Year, and he has been selected as Nevada's Librarian of the Year. Tom, welcome, and thank you for joining us today to share more about yourself, your interest in this position, and your vision for the Seattle Public Library. I'm going to hand the stage over to you to deliver your presentation, and then if we can transition over to questions from the community by no later than 5:15, that should give us plenty of time for lots of good questions.
Great. Thank you, Carmen, and thank you, Jay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to see so many of our Seattle residents joining us today, and I'm very happy to know that this is being recorded for those who couldn't make it. Thank you for attending and being part of the selection process. I'd like to also take a moment to acknowledge that the Seattle Public Library is on Indigenous land. These are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, and specifically the Duwamish people. Next. So I've been asked to share a little bit about myself and my library story. I've been a library user for most of my life. I still recall going to the library every few weeks as a child. I'd load up on books and read half of them by the time I got home. I was born in Las Vegas, but we moved to a small rural community when I was 10. The town library was tiny compared to the library I was used to, and I was convinced that there would be nothing for me to read. I quickly learned of the tenacity of that small town librarian in getting material for patrons. She engaged every patron, regardless of age, who walked in and always asked if they found what they needed. If they said no, she'd write it down, and then when she went into the city every month to pick up new materials from the city library, she'd bring that material back. I can say that in 6 years of being a patron and maturing in my reading, Mrs. Payne almost never disappointed. When she couldn't find something, I'm quite certain she was more distraught than we, the patrons, were. But guaranteed by the next month, she would have found the interlibrary loan, found the book through interlibrary loan or some other way of getting it from the city library system. I can think of no better example of public service in my early years. She opened my eyes to the world of libraries, but most importantly to the opportunities they can create in people's lives. At 16, I was hired as a page and I worked in that rural branch for a little over 2 years. I had to shelve the books, shelf read to make sure the books were in order, and yes, in those days, help the librarian keep the card catalog organized. I also assisted at story times. At first, I helped with the craft projects at the end of story time, but as time went on and as I watched her deliver incredible stories, I asked if I could do some of them with her guidance. Happily, she let me do some every few weeks, and it is in one of these that the trajectory of my career began. I did not realize it at the time because the initial encounter seemed like a simple interaction with a friendly dad who showed up to listen to the story and help me out with the craft project. With 30 or more children in a crafting frenzy, I always appreciated any help. As weeks rolled on, this particular dad was always there to listen to the story, and in his words, helped me herd cats. He brought his daughter, the oldest of 3, in almost every weekend from the time she was 6. Her parents were hardworking but had little money. Father was a mechanic, and I always remember him coming in to get automotive books. He wanted a lot of pictures so that, in his words, he could piece the cars back together. And the mom often wanted clothing patterns to make clothes for her 3 children. I recall the little girl signing every card for every book she or her family members checked out. Funny, to this day, 40 years later, I can remember that name and signature as if it was signed in front of me today. Her dad encouraged her to sign her name boldly and clearly, and he would ask me if it looked good and proper. As time went by, I learned quickly that young children love repetition in storytelling, so I would read a few books 3 or 4 times each year by popular demand. I noticed the young girl took one of these titles out at least once each month, sometimes more. After a couple of years on the job, I was preparing to go to college and move into the city and transfer to a library in Las Vegas. I knew I wouldn't get a chance to see the family too many times, but fortunately the family showed up the Saturday before I left, my last shift, for a story time. And the girl, now 8, was leading her siblings. And as she approached the desk to check out everything, I told her that it was likely the last time I'd see her at this library. And at this point, I noticed that she was checking out her favorite book again. And having seen the librarian offer suggestions numerous times to our young patrons, I pointed out to her that the library had many books on the same topic that she might be interested in. She said, "No, thank you. I really like this one." I asked her why she thought it was so special. And she simply said, whenever I check out this book, my dad reads it to me every night. At that moment, many interactions and situations came clashing together at once in my mind, and I realized that neither parent could read or write. Many indications had been staring me in the face during the previous years of interaction with this family. Finally, having the revelation, I consulted with my librarian, and I asked her if I was correct and if she knew. She smiled and said, "Didn't you ever wonder why they brought their mail to me at the library?" Of course, she was reading it to them. I realized that the girl's father had memorized the story from my several readings of the title, and every time his daughter checked out that one special book, he would read it to her at bedtime. I was young at the time, but I truly had an epiphany on how reading can change a life, and most importantly, how parental love and involvement is essential in early reading success. Those parents knew that they wanted something more for their children, and they found it in that small town library. Many have asked me what happened to that girl. She later became a page at that same rural library, transferred to a library in Las Vegas while attending the university, and many years later became a doctor. This retelling of a pivotal time in my early career illustrates a few powerful examples of libraries. First, early literacy is foundational for a child's development. Second, reading progression in the early school years is critical for academic success. Third, and possibly the most important, building relationships one-on-one with people through listening, empathy, and trust is foundational in the work of libraries. And so, as you all know, with my background, I started as a page. I did move into Las Vegas and start college, and I worked for the largest branch of the Las Vegas County Library System at the time in their circulation department. Over the next few years, I worked a variety of public service desks and learned the importance of readers advisory and reference services. I even did about a 6-month stint working in the Talking Book and Braille Library, which was a new operation for me to learn. I was offered an opportunity to work in the library's information technology department, and I spent nearly 15 years doing this along with construction management work at the Las Vegas Clark County Library, and then on to the State Library and Archives in Carson City, and finally to Henderson Library as their IT manager. It was at this time in Henderson I decided to pursue my master's in library and information science. I had been in libraries at that point for almost 19 years, and I had a growing interest in the administration of a public library. At Henderson Libraries, I was promoted to Assistant Director of Operations while pursuing my graduate degree, and I oversaw information technology, human resources, facilities, capital improvement, and finance. I learned a lot about library operations in this particular position. After a couple of years, the executive director retired. Because I thought the experience would be useful to me for my long-term goals, I decided to apply to find out what types of questions and what was needed to be successful as a candidate. I never imagined that I would get the job, but I did. I was fortunate to lead that team through positive growth and development as an emerging suburban library district. While I enjoyed my 9 years in the position, I felt it was time to get closer to some of the work again. I decided to apply for the Chief Operating Officer at Las Vegas Clark County. And while it was a challenging role that required coordination of not only my division that I directly oversaw, I also had to work and coordinate a lot of work of other divisions to make sure that we were moving the entire organization toward the vision. Within 2 years again, however, the executive director retired, and I initially thought I might stay on, but I wanted to try other types of library work, and I thought this might be the opportunity to do so. While deciding where I wanted to focus my efforts, I took on a few consulting projects and worked with the University of Nevada, Las Vegas libraries, developing their strategic plan and integrating it with the campus-wide plan. I worked on several special projects with the dean, including some work with the new medical school and the library that would be a part of that facility. I heard that the Seattle Public Library is looking for the director of library programs and services about the time I was wrapping up that work. My family had been talking about a move out of state since we'd been in Nevada all our lives, and the Pacific Northwest had been on our radar for some time. I was fortunate and landed the position with Seattle. And as the director of library programs and services for 6 years, I oversaw a significant portion of the library system, including collections, materials, distribution, the branches, the central library, and information technology. Fast forward to today, and I've been the interim chief librarian since the end of March 2021. My focus has been to lead the organization through opening all locations while managing the challenges of operating in a pandemic, to develop a plan to dig the library out of a $5.8 million budget reduction that saw over 60 positions lost, rebuild relations quickly with internal city staff, the mayor's office, and the city council, while also preparing for a new mayor. I can happily say that with a great team of library staff, an engaged board of trustees, an agile foundation, and a supportive friends group, we have done all of this and more. We were able to claw back the $5.8 million in budget reduction, receive $1.8 million in state funding for our Green Lake remodel, and receive about $2.2 million in additional council-added funding for internet hotspots, vandalism repair, and air conditioning and electrification for our southwest and northeast branches. It's been a busy 11 months. I've also been asked how I view the role of community in public libraries and to consider collections, physical spaces, technology, and programming. I like how this question is posed, because all too often the question presented is as the role of the public libraries in communities. That question implies that we know what spaces, collections, etc. that the community needs, or that we will dictate them. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of this reframed question and the focus outwards towards community. However, community is often overused or misinterpreted, and it has many definitions depending upon perspective. Community can be those who make up a neighborhood, although that is more of a 30,000-foot view. Neighborhoods are usually made up of diverse communities, each with their own character, possibly culture, and language. Most certainly, these communities will have different needs of their library's collections, physical spaces, technology, and programming. And every community has a role in defining the library that will have the most impact. If we hope to have more equitable services, outcomes, and impact, we need our communities to feel safe and heard while working with us. A basic tenet of social justice states, those closest to the problem are the closest to the solution. In simple terms, the library's race and social justice work will not succeed unless there's a full participation and leadership of those most affected. Therefore, the role of community in public libraries should not be simply checking the inclusion box because we've invited a group of people to the table. That's disingenuous and potentially harmful. Inviting our diverse communities into crafting the future of Seattle Public Library's collections, physical spaces, technology, and programs is the next level in dismantling old power structures while moving to a fully voiced and empowered future. Next. When considering collections, there are so many questions we probably should ask our communities. Are there technological barriers, geographic barriers, race, ethnocentric barriers, ableist barriers, language barriers, and the list goes on? If these exist, then the collection is not equitably available to all. Do our collection finding tools lend themselves to patrons of all abilities, languages? Have we advanced our cataloging to subject headings that are relevant to people today and accurately represent race and ethnicity in ways that are representative and not harmful or stereotypical? Does the collection represent the entire community? We need to develop processes to conduct an equity audit on, at first, portions of the collection, and then within 3 to 5 years, the entire collection. Next. When considering our physical spaces, are our spaces welcoming for all? We say that, and what does that mean? Are we willing to ask our communities that question, and are we prepared for the answer? Once heard, can we make changes that have impact? For example, in an ableist world, we have the luxury of navigating almost any space. Let's invite community to help us with the question of how do we navigate a library space if we can't see, if we can't hear, if we are on the spectrum or challenged by sensory overload. We must engage with communities with different abilities to better understand how our spaces might be useful, accessible, safe, and welcoming to all. Next. When considering our technology, one of the best examples of the role of the community in technology was the relaunch of our website in late 2018. The effort had considerable input from the public, and they really helped us with how to navigate the site and have it patron-driven. Continuous improvement has not ended there. As we strive to serve more residents, many of whom may not be native English speakers, we have listened to our communities and are now providing web pages in languages other than English. Is there more that we can do to make this technology more successful? Of course. And we can find out through further engagement with our community. Also, in the near future, we'll begin developing a library app. The process is not finalized, but we will see creative ideas on design and functionality from our communities. Once again, being intentional around engagement and as inclusive as possible. It will provide an app that is useful, but also provides more access to library services. We know that many people only have their phone as an internet device, so we want to ensure that this platform provides access to a more varied level of library service than it has in the past. Will technology also allow us to expand our programming if offered virtually as well as in person? Will our communities find that valuable or a hurdle? This can benefit those who have access to this technology in their home, but for those who do not have this technology, we must make sure that the programs are still available in our library spaces or through partners. Our communities deserve a more robust and systemized approach to programs and services that look beyond a one-time or attendance limited program. Next. So when we are considering programming, the library is and has been more than books and materials as indicated. There's a great potential in inviting more community to co-create and develop programs and services. Co-creating with community and partner organizations will better allow the library to serve the full spectrum of lifelong learning needs from birth through advanced age, and to do so in a more equitable fashion. The library has done several equity analyses over the years on various programs and services. These range from our Summer of Learning program for kids to Seattle Reads, our author series, and mobile services. While this is a start, the library needs to review more programs and services, especially if there is an opportunity to redesign a program or service. It takes more time to conduct an equity analysis or to apply the racial equity toolkit process, but the result will be a much more focused and impactful program or service for our communities. And why is this community involvement so important? In my career, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, I don't get it. This was a great program, but only a few people showed up. Let's try it again and see if we have better results. So I ask you, what's the problem with those statements? The community that the library wished to serve was never engaged, never empowered to co-create, and worse yet, the only outcome was attendance, which is not an outcome but a statistic. We must continue to move past attendance as the sole measure of success. We want programs and services that have outcomes articulated and impacts that are measurable. We want to be transparent about the results. We also have to give it time, re-engage with community to improve a program, because this type of work is transformative and not transactional. And ultimately, while all these considerations are critical in delivering more equitable library programs and services, we must also continue seeking diversity in our staff at all levels within the organization. Our communities want to see themselves in their libraries, and we are a people business above all else. Next. So what is my vision for the future of the Seattle Public Library? I envision a Seattle Public Library that is prepared to engage, listen, learn, and be bold enough to share in co-creation of library programs and services that result in individual outcomes and community impact. More importantly, a Seattle Public Library that is providing the most inclusive and innovative library programs and services. While this work is occurring in several places at Seattle Public, this is the next iteration of our equity and race and social justice work as an entire library system. The work must become a higher priority and be adequately resourced if we hope to move the needle and affect real change and impact both individuals and communities. Re-engaging with our communities and partners is the largest task in front of us as we come out of this pandemic. It's been 2 years. It will take honesty about where we stand as an institution, where and to whom we failed in delivering services during the pandemic, and where barriers to equitable outcomes exist within our programs, services, collections, and spaces. It'll take discipline. It'll take training, but more importantly, both individual and institutional self-analysis. I envision a library that's not afraid to hear that something isn't working and strive to do better with both grace and humility. This will require that we understand and acknowledge the structural racism that exists within the library, as well as understand the racial and intersectional disparities within our city. For this shift to occur, the library as an institution and as an entity made up of individuals must grow in its knowledge that racism is about power. If people of color have no platform to engage, then voices are not simply marginalized, they are suppressed. The library can and should be that space and platform for all voices, thus drawing on the strengths of our entire city. To be thorough in removing barriers that have been created over generations, the library's work must be ever developing and evolutionary. There will be mistakes along the way, but a stumble should not deter us. As a learning institution, we must acknowledge a mistake, sincerely apologize, learn, improve, and move forward. As we look to both reallocate resources to deliver more equitable outcomes, we know that we will need to also find additional revenue to adequately fund the work of the library. The library cannot do this alone. We need our foundation and the Friends of the Library support more than ever. We will need to ask our patrons and our neighbors to be advocates for the library and its work throughout the city. The library is not and has not been a place that simply checks out books. It is a place of opportunity, and one of the last free places on earth that a person can simply be. Thus, I also envision a system that develops sustainable funding to not only make our library buildings more climate resilient, but also more flexible and adaptable to the needs of the community now through the middle of the century. Today, we have the budget to barely maintain our buildings, which now range from 20 to over 100 years old. We have at times scraped enough funds together to do some basic remodeling, or maybe with help of our foundation, to do a larger remodel that encompasses an entire building. But this inconsistent approach and the long-term funding concerns hamper the library when seeking to make much needed changes to better accommodate the future needs of our diverse residents and the size of our population. The Library for All campaign is now 24 years in the rearview mirror. This successful and massive campaign built the library infrastructure seen today. I'm not calling for the exact same campaign as the past, which relied on an expanding physical footprint. However, I believe it's time to once again leverage private and public dollars to rejuvenate our libraries and look at innovative solutions to library service delivery, such as kiosks, additional holds lockers, maybe some type of new lifelong learning centers scattered throughout our neighborhoods, or partnerships with other organizations and city departments to help us with that. As mentioned earlier, we must take a lesson from the pandemic and create more technology solutions so that services may be delivered virtually when needed or if desired. And we must be prepared to explore opportunities not yet imagined or voiced. We should not be weighed down by the traditional view of libraries, but rather open to spaces that better represent more distinct community needs. We can do this through our engagement with our residents, our partners, and our political stakeholders. We have a generous community, and we have a community that loves its libraries. And I believe they will support an effort to rejuvenate our physical spaces to more equitably support all of Seattle's residents. Everything I mentioned today will require engagement, research, strategy, and prioritization. Libraries have often had to react to change rather than plan for change. That's why I'm recommending a strategic planning process that incorporates foresight. Foresight is a multidisciplinary study of change and its implications on the future. It draws upon insights from a wide variety of fields, including economics, engineering, sociology, politics, to name just a few. Foresight is not about predicting the future, but rather about uncovering a range of plausible alternative futures and then identifying the indicators that suggest which way the future is unfolding. This process will lift our thinking beyond today and just the next 2 years and move us towards envisioning the library 10 years from now. The objective is not to know what will happen, but to be ready for whatever does happen. The purpose is not necessarily to be exactly right, which is impossible, but rather not surprised. Surprise means inadequate preparation, potential waste of resources, late response, and a higher risk of failure. The inclusion of foresight in our strategic plan will help our communities, staff, partners, and stakeholders envision, plan for, and work toward a preferred future library. Next. So finally, why am I interested in this position? With all the challenges we have faced in Seattle during the pandemic, that's a good question. I've had the opportunity to work for Seattle Public Library for nearly 7 years. The answer is pretty simple. We have a great team here. They've weathered so much of this pandemic. Unlike many who might have an option to work from home, the vast majority of library staff must come into the branches in the central library because our work is about people serving people. While we can do some things remotely, not everyone has the resource to be a virtual participant. And our staff, throughout the entire pandemic, has always continued to advocate for patrons and equitable programs and services. Today, we are once again open to the public 7 days per week, and everyone is welcome in our spaces. Our team has faced every challenge that our residents have dealt with through the pandemic, while also providing restroom services early in the pandemic to insecurely house patrons, curbside services, and now back to more normal operations. They have lived, They have lived with fear and anxiety of exposure. They have dealt with the challenges of childcare and caring for those at home with COVID-19, and yet provided great customer service in the most trying of times. So why? The SPL team never abandoned the residents of Seattle, and when whatever has been asked of them, they have figured out how to deliver safely and to as many people as possible, regardless of the hurdles. Proud of what they've accomplished as we've walked this road over the last 2 years, and they have given so much to this pandemic, and once we begin to come out of this difficult time, I know there is so much more pent-up creativity, compassion, and potential in this staff and this library system. I look forward to working with our staff, our Board of Trustees, Foundation, friends, and the residents of Seattle to develop a strategic plan that charts the course for a new library future that is anti-racist and striving to remove barriers to equitable outcomes for all the residents of Seattle. I realize this is no simple task. It will take listening, empathetic leadership, planning, and hard work. However, I believe this team has demonstrated its strength, dedication, and commitment to library services during this pandemic. And I have no doubt that with such a talented team, that the Seattle Public Library will become the change we seek. And finally, let me thank you for your interest and participation in the Chief Librarian selection process, and thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about myself and a vision of the future for the Seattle Public Library.
Thanks, Tom, for that presentation. Now we're going to jump into the Q&A portion. And we do have a few questions that we prepared in advance that we'll start with. Jay and I will take turns asking the first few questions, and then we'll turn our attention to the questions coming in via the chat. So Laura will cue us on that. So Tom, if you've wetted your whistle.
Sorry about that. It's been a few hours of talking.
So I have the first question, and this you talked about this a bit, but I think maybe this gives you the opportunity to get in a little more detail. It's about how do you go about connecting with and learning about the communities you serve when you assume a community-focused position of leadership like the Chief Librarian role? And maybe you can also talk about how you've stayed connected with community during COVID.
Well, I think the first part, or the last part of the question, has been tough for all of us trying to stay connected with community and our partners. That's why it is really the largest task in front of us. As the Chief Librarian, part of the work is going out in community, going to not only library events, but other events as you work with other partners and you hear about other opportunities. That's one way. Our teams have massive amount of knowledge and a lot of experience working with a variety of community-based organizations and partners over the years, relying on our teams to also have those engagements and to bring that information back into our planning processes, to make sure those folks are invited to our planning discussions, regardless of where we're at, but really starting to understand what the needs are in the city. We know that in certain parts of the city, those who are most marginalized in our communities have actually had a more disproportionate impact from COVID. We know that. We know that many of our community partners have struggled considerably just to stay afloat and even to provide basic services to their clients who desperately need it. So there's much work for us to do. That includes the chief librarian. You can't do it from sitting in your office. You're going to have to be out in the community. And hopefully we'll be able to do that both in person, but also determine some blended ways of using our virtual technology and these such as this to be able to have some of these discussions. But it's really important still that people have that face-to-face time as well. So hopefully COVID will leave us with a little bit of a break and we continue to move forward and have more personal contact.
Thank you, Tom. The next question we have is about the leadership values you hold. What do you see as your priority values as a leader, and how do you demonstrate them in your daily work life?
I think for me, both transparency of purpose or intent and communication of that. And that would be to the staff or to the public as we have discussions or as we chart a path forward. To me, that is a big piece. Honesty and integrity is also a big part of that. If we're going to have hard discussions and hard decisions, we need to be honest. We need to say that that's what we have, and we need to work through it. And we need to continue communication. Those are the things I value very highly. I think in my career, that integrity piece is also it. Being able to say that, you know what, we made a mistake here. To be able to say that I made a mistake. Those are big, important pieces to move an organization forward, both from the public's perspective as well as the staff.
Thanks, Tom. You spoke in your presentation about your vision for the future of Seattle Public Library. What are some immediate changes you see coming for the system or for libraries in general in the next 5 years?
I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see a greater push for more digital content and a greater use of that digital content. And we've already seen it in the pandemic, and that trend is likely to continue. It's a costly trend. Digital materials cost us more than anything else we purchase. The library will have to determine how to best balance that moving forward. And we also have to look at it from a collection perspective of everything digital is not everything in print or in publication. So how do you create collections that are lasting and important for current relevance, but also research relevance in the future? So that's one area that we know that we'll see some changes. I do believe that artificial intelligence will also have its impact on libraries. I hope for the good in the sense that it will provide our patrons more tools to information, and that we will have more tools for our staff to provide those services. I really do think that that will be something we start seeing the forward trend on in the next 5 years. And I think that was all the question. You broke up a little on my end, Carmen, so please, if I missed anything, please let me know.
I think you got it.
Tom, on the issue of balance in another context, how do you best balance limited library resources in order to provide both traditional library services, such as collections, reference services, computer access, etc., and services that are newer to libraries and more responsive to changing community needs, such as hiring social workers, distributing COVID test kits, installing Wi-Fi hotspots, at under-resourced communities, etc. How do you deal with that balance?
Well, I think folks often think that it's always going to be something is lost. Sometimes that is the case, but also there's the opportunity to look at the work that we do already. And I'll provide one example. We know that public computing use in libraries has been going down for probably 3 or 4 years running. Yet we still have a very large physical plant of public computers, and we have to pay to upgrade those every year because we're replacing a certain amount of them all the time to keep the machines viable. So simple things like saying, hey, we don't need all of those, all of a sudden bring back some additional funds, may bring back additional space in which you could do something different in the space, provide a different service. Those are some of the things that we can look at as far as efficiencies, but also realizing some of these things are not needed. When we engage with our communities, that's where we get the real value in the fact that in some cases, a traditional library setting with a massive amount of books is what the community needs and wants. In other communities, it may be more about space to meet and gather and to have more lifelong learning programs and less about the collections. It doesn't mean there won't be a collection. It doesn't mean that we can't deliver materials that patrons need in a timely manner. But that is important and relevant to that community, and that then allows us to drive that particular branch or location to change. So there are ways to do this as it's not an either or, but as we look at trying to address some of the more innovative approaches we might want to take, yes, we sometimes will need to find additional resources or work with our foundation to try to find an area of focus that we know will move a needle. And so if we're going to ask for additional funds, let's not distribute them so broadly that they're diluted and do nothing, but let's direct them to particular areas of focus that might actually move a needle for a community, a particular prioritized audience, whatever the case may be, but not just be distributed. We've done that too long. And so we have a lot of things that we do, but they're not all adequately funded.
Just one more question. Tell us a bit about your philosophy on maintaining an intellectual freedom in public libraries during times of heated political and social discourse. Respond if an event held on library property is being protested, or if a book in the library's collection is being challenged by a group.
So I think I heard everything, Carmen. I apologize, you broke up on my end. I believe it was intellectual freedom, and then as it might apply to an event or difficult discussions or material that might be somebody seeks to ban it.
Yes, you suggest.
Okay. So I think in this particular case, obviously, libraries always will stand for the intellectual freedom. So in my time, I've seen all kinds of books tried to be banned. I've seen all kinds of protests on materials in libraries. And I think it is the one area that libraries need to stand firm. You look today at the world that wants to ban all kinds of books, burn books. We've seen that time in history a few times. It generally doesn't turn out well. While ideas may be repugnant, there's lessons to learn from all kinds of different views. And it's important that the information is out there. I guarantee you that a good library has something that offends everyone. And I've been doing this for a long time. And I can definitely find something that would probably offend me in our collections, at least from my personal standpoint. As a professional, I believe it should be there. When we talk about things around events, that is also another tricky area. We had an event here that caused quite a stir. It was the Wolf event. Our transgender patrons also felt the concern, but also the harm of that event, and the library held it at the Central Library. That particular issue was related to the legalities that the library, if it opens its doors to people, to anyone, to excuse me, for the public, I should say, to use its meeting rooms or spaces, then it must be open to all. And so that was the option. Now, in that same particular instance, we also took a hyper-neutral role. And the question is, does the library have to take a hyper-neutral role in those particular cases? Or can it say, we are legally obligated to provide this group, this meeting space. However, the library in no way endorses this particular group. That's one way to at least state where we are at on an issue without being so neutral. The other options are to look at possibilities that are on the floor for the board to make decisions on. Those could be things around the fact that you could make it that no one can use any of the program spaces other than the library. The library will put on those events and will put on events that it decides with partners, and that's all that will happen. No one will be able to rent a space or use a space. That's how you could solve that problem if we felt that was the way to do it. But it's important to have not only the heated discussion on the front end, but also a discussion on the back end of debriefing what those things look like, so that that a board has more options, the staff or the administration working on these have considered other options as well, and that's an important piece of it. Also, intellectual freedom, we know, will intersect with equity work and race and social justice work, and it is going to be a delicate balance always, and people will contest that, protest that some of the things that we still use in libraries, the terminology, subject headings, could be material that we see as well. And so that will be a constant debate for us, not only the book banning, but then also as we have these more detailed discussions about race and anti-racism, that will also be a portion of the intellectual freedom discussion. That's why we're actually working at revamping our intellectual freedom training for staff, so that we can talk about and train our staff on how those things intersect intellectual freedom and our race and social justice work. And with that, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tom. Let me turn to Laura and ask, what other questions do we have in the chat?
All right, actually, Tom, you're going to want to hydrate. We have lots of really good questions from the public here. So,
hopefully I have
and
voice.
Right. We don't have the same sort of limitation on time that we had with the staff piece. So feel free to go past 2 or 3 minutes if you need to on any of these. The first question is, a city librarian or a chief librarian becomes a community leader when they take the position. What are examples of you working directly in person with the Seattle community as a representative of the library and in your personal life?
I think I understand the question, so I will try from my understanding of it. So when you become that public official and that representative of the library, it is paramount that you're present. And that means that you are attending a variety of different events in the community. You're out in public, and that you engage when you're there. That could be a library program. That could be a city event in which the library was asked to be there, and the executive was asked to be there to support it. And it's not to be just a wallflower and say, I went and got counted. You need to engage with the public in attendance or the particular audience focus that they have if you're going to really represent the library. This role is an ambassador, and it's an ambassador in a couple of ways. It's an ambassador to the community about the library and what it brings to the table, but it's also an ambassador of the people to represent in other government bodies, the city, the state, and the federal government, why the Seattle Public Library is important and why what the people of this city are saying is important needs to be heard and funded so that we can actually make opportunity thrive for everyone in the city of Seattle. That's the role you have to play as the executive. There's a lot of other pieces they have to do day to day, but that is in its simplest form what we have to do in this position.
All right, we have the next question is, the online reference resources from OED and the New York Times have been a lifesaver. What plans are there to expand online resources at the Seattle Public?
Well, it's an interesting question. We look at a variety of products every single year. We look at a variety of things that can be digitized that we own ourselves that maybe haven't seen the light of day. The post-intelligencer is one of the index for that is one of the things I'm really happy about in the last few years. We've been able to make available to patrons that hasn't been available in the past. But when we look at these, we also have to say, what are they serving particularly, and are they covered in other areas of the library? Some cases we don't want duplication because of the cost and the expense. And so we do have to work sometimes as a business and balance that kind of return on investment approach to some of these services or some of these databases. But at the end of the day, we look at a lot of different things every year that may be possibilities for patrons. And we actually take a lot of patron requests and input, especially around materials in the collection or needed information. If people find that we don't have something, or they've experienced a particular service or database in a library system that they came from in their previous home. So those are all ways that we process that information to try to bring the most relevant both digital collections as well as in-print collections. So if someone has a great idea, let us know. we may not have heard about it. I mean, there are a lot of new things being developed every day.
There was one follow-up question to that one, which is, if you get the job, will you unearth the bulk autograph collection for public display?
Interesting. I just had a conversation, I want to say about a month ago, and I cannot remember the entirety of the conversation, but I know there was some interest in further digitization or the processing or starting the process of digitization, and I believe that was the one that was mentioned. The trick to all of this when we talk about digitizing special collections, as you can imagine, a library of this size, we get a variety of people who want to donate to special collections. And a lot of those materials are valuable. But one thing we do here is to make sure we're the most appropriate place for that material to be. And secondly, what we do is we analyze how long is it going to take us to do the basic accessioning, which means bring it into the system so that we even know it's there. Not the fancy stuff that everybody can see as a patron, but just so that for internal workings, we know what we have. Then we have to ask, if this is a major piece or a body of work that needs to be digitized, how long is that going to take? Is that something that we can do with internal resources? Are we going to have to outsource that? Are we going to have to bring in additional temporary staff to help do that work? Those are all the things that we look at when we decide we're going to do a digitization project, because there's a ton of work that has to go on. It's not just simply throwing something on a scanner. It's all the metadata content, also all that data about data. So when you have an image, you have a ton of information behind it, both for finding purposes, but also all the relevant information about the particular image or whatever the case, or whatever particular item we're showing. Sometimes that takes transcription when we're talking about older documents that are written by hand. That's another piece of it. So it doesn't exist. Or if it's in another language, the translation that has to occur. Or if it's from another time, and sometimes the translation that has to occur, even if it's the English language. So there's a lot of work that we take on when we make a decision on digitizing collections, and it has to be very planned out, because these are all usually very large and extensive projects that we take on.
All right, this next question is one that I really love. What's your preferred terminology for someone who uses the services of the Seattle Public Library? Patrons, members, users, customers, or something else, and why?
Well, I think, this has been a this has been back and forth for many years in libraries, and I have always stayed pretty firmly on the patron side, because a patron speaks of the fact that they are also giving something. We give something in return. So we give service, and however you define that, as a patron. And a patron gives something, and that patron gives us support. They may be a taxpayer, that may be how they view their support. They may be a donor. But at the end of the day, it's a two-way street. And so there is something that we get and something they get. And so it is more of the old model of patronage that people think of from the Renaissance times and further back even. But that's where I stand on it. Some obviously will debate me tooth and nail on that, because they think that if we call folks patrons that we don't have customer service, or that we don't apply customer service principles. And that most certainly isn't the case. We definitely do. So patron is where I leave it, I guess.
All right, good. Then we won't change our style guide.
No, I don't want to be in trouble.
All right. When you worked for Henderson Libraries, it sounds like they were considering merging with the nearby library system. What was your role in that, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, absolutely not. They were never wanting to merge with that system. So that was an interesting piece. Let's see, how do I phrase this? So no, Henderson was never. Boulder City was never. When I was at Las Vegas Clark County, one of the other library districts, the North Las Vegas Library, had gotten impacted by the recession by another 25% more loss in revenue than any other library district. That particular district had approached, or I should say the mayor had approached the library district to consider taking them over. And that is something I was definitely involved in. From the Henderson perspective, I definitely was involved in the discussion with our local politicians that there was no way that was anything that they had interest in. And quite honestly, at that point, probably by about my third or fourth year of leading the Henderson libraries, there really wasn't a need. We had grown from a mom and pop library system of just a couple small libraries to a library system that had 6 locations, some large locations, a true suburban system, providing many of the same resources as the Las Vegas Clark County. We had to grow up. We had to make sure that we were putting resources and dedicating resources to be better and building more capacity. Henderson, and one of the reasons that there was any issue at all, Henderson went from about 145,000 people to nearly 300,000 people in a decade. That's a doubling of the entire population in less than a decade. And so, yes, throughout the entire city, there were, everyone was catching up. But when we caught up, we were definitely right in there with Las Vegas Clark County. And Las Vegas Clark County also didn't want to, they didn't want to take on any more libraries. I can assure you that merging library systems and doing all that is complicated beyond belief. There's union contracts. There are any number of other issues around taxation, a lack of a particular amount of taxation or reduced taxation, and yet you still have to run it at your same level. There's a lot of complications. I've been through that a couple different times as people explored it, and it's ugly and messy.
All right, thank you for that. The next question is, a little bit long here, so bear with me. Seattle's investment in buildings and staff have put it in an enviable position to deliver innovative and accessible services. You have mentioned a 10-year building modernization plan. Is there a comparable library personnel modernization plan? What is missing from current library staffing models and skill sets to achieve your vision?
That's an interesting question. I think we have a very talented staff. That is not the concern. I think when we look at what that next future of the library is, when we look at the different types of models of services we may work with our communities to implement, that's the question of what kind of staff will we need? What's going to be the of most value? Will that be someone who comes from community? Maybe they don't have a master's degree. Maybe they don't have a bachelor's degree, but they have, a decade worth of doing this kind of work in the community. And that might be something around education, literacy, etc. Where do we make a change in our kind of staffing classifications and models to take advantage of that great knowledge that we may not be able to get? One of the issues that, this library profession has faced is that it is a white profession. There's a lot of work to try to unwind that and to diversify that, but that's going to take time. And if we really want to be able to be more embedded in community and have higher trust in community, it's really going to be, do folks see themselves in the library when they come in or in that service that we're providing? And that's a key piece that we have to really look at and ask when we're moving forward. Do I think we have the team to move us into that next level? Yes. Will it take a lot of extra effort in recruiting and really changing, could be some of our, again, classifications, some of our requirements. Do I really need the college degree? Do I need a master's degree in whatever particular classification I might be looking at? Maybe not. Again, some of those things are part of that structural racism that we talked about. Those are barriers to a lot of people participating and being a part of the solution. So we need to be thinking about that as we move forward, especially with some of these new services driven by community.
All right, the next question is along similar lines. Looking forward about 5 to 10 years, is the library funding model for operations as opposed to capital needs structurally sound itself? And if not, what needs to change?
So, an interesting question, right? Because right now we have what's considered general fund revenue that comes from the city, and that is made up of property tax, sales tax, and special use tax. We have the levy, which is voted on every 7 years. That is an operational levy. That makes up about 33% of our budget right now. So we have, and much like the city, it is a reality, built kind of a house of cards on these levies because they all have to cycle through and they all have to be voter approved. We have been very fortunate in this city that most of them are. But we want to make sure that as we look at what our future funding models look like, once we start nearing that 50%, or we go over that 50% in a levy, I guess the bad thing on that is if something doesn't pass, 50% of the library operation and or programs and services would be impacted, and something would have to close down, buildings, services, etc. So every time we lean more into that levy money and we push more onto that, because that's how we've been structuring a lot of this new work, not only the library, but the city itself, that is what happens. We have a greater reliance, not only for the operations, but for everything else we do because of that push to the levy. We're lucky. We have a foundation and a friends group that provides financial support. Our foundation is the largest in the country. They provide right now, $4.2 million a year to really support all of the programming that we do. I've never worked for a system that was all funded by private dollars for programming. Most of that comes from general funds. So, we also have to ask ourselves that question and that structure. Is that sustainable for our partner, the foundation? It most certainly doesn't make us the most innovative, because I'd much rather use that money that we know we're doing things in perpetuity, this programming, sometimes even staff. I'd rather that be picked up by the levy or by the general fund so that we can do more innovative work with the foundation dollars. And so those are some of the things that we have to consider as we move forward. We may need to switch some things around. Is this sustainable? Yes, as long as the voters continue to say yes. So that's always the concern. And it's also the right sizing of what we're asking for. But do remember, we are and have been going through one of the highest inflationary periods in over 30 years. That's going to have a massive impact on all of government, not just corporate America, not us, all of us individually. And so that will come back to hit us over the next 5 years. And so we are going to have to be thinking of what that levy looks like, what those general fund requests might be moving forward. Sorry, it's a lot of technical government jargon, so if you didn't follow, I do apologize.
We need a glossary for this, don't we? So I think you mentioned earlier the Wolf event that occurred in 2020 when we were talking about intellectual freedom issues, and that members of the community, in particular members of the transgender community, felt that event did harm to the community itself. What ways do you see that the library could better serve the LGBTQ community moving forward?
In a couple of ways, and I think this is something for the chief librarian to work on, as well as to engage with a variety of groups in community, but also for the library to, through its engagement, really think about the intersectionality with race and some of those disproportionate impacts as well. Those are all things that we need to do better. The chief librarian, I think, needs to engage more with some of these groups and leaderships in groups. Again, this is the part of being out and about, not just events, but hey, can we meet and talk about XYZ and how we might be able to better support? Or are there other issues that we don't know about, that we're not providing a safe space or place for people to come in? Those are all things that we need to be able to hear. Sometimes they're uncomfortable. Sometimes they're heated discussions, especially if harm's been done. But if we don't engage, nothing is going to get better. And we need to be able to work through that. Will we be 100% right and do everything 100% correct? No. Can we move forward and move the needle to a more positive place and space for our LGBTQIA community to be in? Yes, we can definitely do that. So it's not only the staff, it is the executive also working in community to have those discussions, to hear what those other leaders.
Looks like we've got a freeze on Tom. Is everybody else? There we go. Tom, we lost you for just a minute.
Oh, I think I was wrapping up, so I think we're okay.
Okay, I will move on to the next question. Actually, I have a couple of sort of COVID era questions. And the first one is, if you're chosen to lead the library, what is your vision for volunteering at the Central Library? The person who wrote this question is a longtime volunteer and hopes to return soon, but as safely as possible, which could be in person or virtually, with socially distanced, masked, vaccinated, etc. It's been 2 years so far since we've been able to use volunteer services, and he mentions that it would be great to get back to working with the great students at Central on a Monday evening on the 5th floor.
I will, I'm probably no better than anyone else at outguessing COVID. But at least some of what we've seen through this last surge, and even looking at anything that might be on the horizon, there is at least hope that we will be in a better place moving through probably late March all the way through the summer and early fall. We don't know what that brings after that for sure, but I am hopeful that we can start moving back in the direction of having programs again, which to me is also a key place to start having volunteers come back in as they had in the past. But part of our concern has been, even though we're asking for vaccines and everything else, is just the concern for our volunteers. We are a large public building or buildings with a lot of people coming in and out. So we have been concerned and worried about the exposure to our volunteers, much like we are with our staff. And we don't always know what kind of equipment that you might come in with. We hopefully can provide some of these things, but sometimes that may not work for you. You don't want to have an N95 mask. That may not be pleasant, or you may not be able to deal with that trying to work and breathe using one of those. But I think, I would really love to see our volunteers back. It's, one of the most exciting things to see is volunteers really get involved doing homework help or any number of things that they do for us on a really regular basis. They really support our delivery of some of these programs and services. So I'm hopeful. I was really hopeful that that would happen last fall. I'm really hopeful that at least with some of the better news that we're getting here in the last week or so, that as we get into the summer months, we may actually be back and able to have volunteers back. I miss seeing a lot of those faces, especially at Central, that I had seen.
Thank you. So the other sort of COVID era question we have is, to protect both library staff and patrons, do you support requiring proof of vaccination at the library entrance? Why or why not?
No, I don't. In this particular case, it would be something with the number of people we have coming through, a barrier to service. We have learned and know through this process that obviously the masks at this point for most of what we've experienced with COVID helps. And we know how much difficulty we've had just enforcing masks. It would be still an additional problem to be asking for those, because that would create other points of conflict, either with staff or security, as we work through and try to sort that out with a patron who just does not want to do it. We know masks have been trying enough. When we look at also putting in these types of requirements, we're also looking at what is being directed either by the governor through what they are proclaiming for businesses, et cetera, to do, and also public health. And for libraries, that has not been where the focus has been at, because the assumption is that people will come in with masks. When you go into a restaurant, people know that they're going to take the mask off. And so that's why there's the check for a restaurant to make sure that you have had the vaccine. You've chosen to eat there and you've chosen to take off your mask, as has everyone else. So no, I am not a fan of that. I wanted to make sure that we had, it was a hard decision to make sure that our staff were fully vaccinated for the benefit, obviously, of the public health and well-being, but the health and well-being of our staff who have to work in these buildings every day. Tough decision to make that call, and really appreciated the board support in that, but I don't recommend it or suggest it unless it comes out as a requirement from the state. Then of course we would have to comply.
All right, I think we have time for about 2 more questions here. So this will be the second to last. as you probably know, when we made the announcement about the finalist candidates, there was some discussion about the residency of the library director. Whoever's running the library, is it important that the library director live in the city of Seattle? So the question is, what city do you live in? And do you think it's important that the head of the Seattle Public Library lives in the community that it serves?
So I live in Bonnie Lake, so I do not live in Seattle. I have worked in a variety of library systems in which I may or may not have lived in the actual city, but lived in the general region or metroplex of that city. And I think it's one of the challenges in general, not just for me, but our staff, for finding affordable housing in which you can live. And so that is an issue. The main thing, and it has been something consistently, regardless of me living in a city or not, is being present. I don't want to be just working from home. I need to be in the city. I need to be engaging with the community or those community partners that we just talked about in a couple of the previous questions. If we're going to be back to meeting in person, I need to be meeting with the mayor, council members, their staff, their teams in person. So for me, I will be there to do that work in the city, making those connections as necessary.
All right, thank you. And then the last one that I'm going to pose here is, have you compared notes with your predecessors, such as Marcellus Turner, Deborah Jacobs, Liz Stroup, sorry. And if so, what helpful advice and observations did they convey to you regarding Seattle politics, library funding, and just running the library in general?
Well, beyond Marcellus, no. I know Deborah Jacobs, but the other person you mentioned, I do not. I have not met them. And I think when Marcellus left, I think his biggest concern at the time was the fact that obviously there was going to be mayoral transition, and that of course brings a little bit of chaos to everyone's world. And I think he gave me good sound advice there of making sure I was connecting with all the folks that would be who we thought at the time would be remaining. That often changes. But it did allow us to really quickly hit the ground running, talking to some of those folks, making sure we understood where there were issues, where we could take advantage of their knowledge, maybe to move something as important as that big budget reduction and have that restored. So I appreciated that information. And I think when I talk, or when I think about people who have helped, when I first got here, about how to, what is the Seattle culture? How does the city work? A lot of folks were helpful. Several foundation board members, board members on the board of trustees, and then some of the staff, just trying to really provide context as to how the city operates, why it works the way it does, why it thinks the way it does, what the culture of the city is. Those are really valuable pieces to me, because I'm not of the Northwest. And so, I come from a place that's 120 degrees in the summer. Just the whole fact of rain and cold was new to me, let alone, a whole city that thinks and operates differently than the place I had come from. It's an older city. I come from a new city. And so, also, what does that mean? That was some of the things that people were talking about, how these structures, these decisions have been made over longer periods of time. So I think that all was very valuable when I first started, and even as I made this transition.
All right, well, that is the last question I'm going to ask, because we have about 10 minutes and I want Carmen and Jay to have a chance to close us out and share sort of next steps. But I did want to share that we are recording these sessions, and my team, the communications office, will be posting these out on Friday on our Shelf Talk blog. So if you want to watch this again, if you want to share this with a friend, you can do that there on Friday. And Carmen, Jay, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Laura. And thanks, Tom. We're coming to the end of our time, but it's been a great discussion. Thanks for all the really good questions. I want to thank Tom for his participation today and your presentation as well, and as well as all of you attending for your great questions and your time. And on a really beautiful day outside. So tomorrow we'll be hearing from our other finalist candidate, Chad Helton, from 4:30 to 6, same time, same place. As the other key piece of follow-up that I wanted to mention was Hoya Partners, our search consultant, has developed a feedback form for you to provide your feedback about the 2 candidates. And I think Laura's going to share that in the chat. We're going to, it's also going to be available on the library's website at spl.org. And then the deadline for feedback is going to be Monday the 14th. So through the weekend onto Monday. And that feedback is intended to be anonymous. So, and it will be, yeah, it will all be compiled for us. The library board, oh, it looks like Laura just posted the link. So then the library board is discussing a timeline for those final steps in decision making. We'll share those details as soon as we have them. We're just trying to work out schedules. So thanks again for your participation. Jay, did you have anything? Okay. And I'm going to adjourn the special meeting of the Library Board of Trustees. And have a great evening, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.